There's a quote. It might be by Frederick Jameson in The Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, or Mark Fisher in Capitalist Realism, or possibly Slavoj Žižek in One of a Million Places. They have all said a version of this, and that is, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And that's where we must start, with our imagination, saddled and addled by centuries of crushing conditioning and propaganda to believe this system is the system, the only system. It's not. We've been browbeaten into believing capitalism is the only system that works. Yet somewhere deep in our minds, we know the truth. It doesn't. Except for the elite, who have created their own class in the capitalist system by cheating and lying and benefiting from the capitalist system's built-in inequities and unfairness, and then locking all the doors to their stolen treasures so they don't have to share it with those that truly earned and deserve it. We've been told that capitalism is the only economic and political system that ensures freedom for so long we can't see the walls of the capitalist prison that surrounds us. Or even more insidiously, capitalism lets us see the walls of the prison and simply convinces us we don't. What is the key to changing this? Well, there are many keys because there are many locks, because the elite don't want to let you in. But the first key, the most important key, is freeing our minds. George Clinton said, "Free your mind and your ass will follow." Breaking free of the chains that bind us mentally and emotionally to capitalism is the first and most important step to true liberation. Try it. Here are some exercises to help you get your mind in shape to reject and overthrow this system. At first, it might seem or feel funny. It might seem like a joke. But do them every day, like squats or pull-ups. Do them regularly, and suddenly your mind and imagination will see beyond capitalism. It will create a new paradigm, a new reality. So here are some mental exercises. Remember, start slow. If you feel weak and dizzy, stop. Sit down, have some water, take a breath. But then, as soon as possible, start again. You will see that eventually your mind will get stronger. Here we go. So imagine right off the bat, no borders, no countries. The concept of borders and countries are made up. They are illusions created to protect the elites. Everyone would benefit from a borderless world except the privileged class. They will try to tell you through their corporate-produced media propaganda that it would be chaos. But think, it's chaos right now for everyone but them. Maybe we could impose a fair and equitable order where honorable people do honorable things. I know it sounds crazy, but just imagine it. And while we're at it, finally revise history and replace all the lies and myths and distortions with truth. The foundation for any fair political system must be truth. Imagine breaking up any corporations that have billionaires as their leaders. And because any corporation that has a billionaire as its leader is by its very nature a multinational corporation that destroys the multinational environment, that creates the ecological catastrophe that we all must live in, that wants us to adhere to strict borders while they ignore them, that exploits and abuses workers, imagine taxing those billionaires, not just here, but globally. Every country that has been plundered gets their piece of the pie without loopholes until being a billionaire isn't a thing anymore. You might make $1 billion, you might have $1 billion, but it's not yours. You didn't earn it, you stole it. Now, you didn't hold up a grocery store, you held up the world. You robbed Earth. But now your victims, the people of the earth, are taking away the majority of it, and the people will decide what to do with it. And believe me, if we tax the billionaires, we could use that revenue to fix the entire world. Imagine it. Now imagine turning the industries, the technologies, the manufacturing over to the workers who actually do the labor. The workers are smarter than Trump and Musk. They just didn't have the same unfair advantages. And making their environmental responsibility and workers' rights, including a fair wage, health and retirement benefits, and most importantly, respect and dignity, an essential component of their survival. If you can't figure out how to make stuff without incorporating, no pun intended, these ideas, then maybe you shouldn't be in business. Imagine banning money from elections in all its forms. Money corrupts purity. Money corrupts fairness. Money corrupts progress. Money smothers freedom and liberation. Money seduces, like the siren song, which leads people to make wrong and bad decisions. So imagine banning the lobbyists and special interests, and since it only exists in America, no place else, the Electoral College, so that every vote is clean and unsullied and free of undue influence, and most importantly, counts. Give anyone they want a half an hour or 2 hours of time across all media. Imagine taking a break from the mind-numbing pap that dominates TV for just a couple of weeks for information that will help us make decisions about our destinies. Just 2 weeks and no more. Let us decide with minds unclouded by propaganda and advertising whose ideas make sense and who can deliver on them, and who is lying, and fact-check their rhetoric so that the rich would have no advantage over the poor. Imagine dismantling the corporate media. There are amazing muckraking journalists and truth-tellers who are relegated to fringe publications and media and then branded as marginal. Imagine if their voices could be heard like the New York Times or MSNBC. And there are creative artists too. There are artists who make TV and movies and music that are original, that say something, that move you and scare you and make you laugh and cry and think, and aren't manufactured for the sole purpose of making money for a corporation that distracts us from the truth that these are hypnotic commercials for the perpetuation of capitalism. Commodities disguised as art. Imagine these things. You've been taught to believe ideas like this are naive. You've been taught to believe ideas like this are stupid, but they're not. It's the opposite. I'm sure you all have your crazy ideas of things you've imagined that would make the world a better place without capitalism, and maybe kept them to yourself because you're afraid people will think you're crazy, but they won't. I won't. In fact, you might find out many people have the same idea. Sharing these ideas, imagining that reality is how this starts. You know, manifesting for self-improvement or for enrichment has become such a trend, such a fad. But what if we manifested a different form of government? What if we manifested a different form of country? What if those very words, country and government, became irrelevant, replaced by better and new words that speak to our collectively manifested reality today? So let's manifest a reality where the Democrats and Republicans, like the Tories and Whigs, could be tossed into the dustbins of history just as easily. Imagine that. America is proud of its revolution. We celebrate it. We threw off the shackles of our violent colonial overlords and declared our freedom, even as we admittedly ignore the genocide of our indigenous peoples and savage practice of racial slavery and the wholesale destruction of our pristine environment. But what if we had a better revolution? Imagine a better revolution, a revolution where no one is left behind except the craven and the greedy elite that lord over us now. Is the only reason that it hasn't happened a lack of imagination? And in its wake, a new system that we control and represents us, a classless society where everyone is truly equal. Close your eyes and imagine that world. If we all close our eyes and concentrate and focus and imagine that world really intensely, who knows what might happen? Some might ask, how is any of this imagination possible without the reality of violence? And that's a good question. Let's talk about the consequences of violence. I watched an interview with the scholar Norman Finkelstein, former Princeton professor, author of The Holocaust Industry, and a staunch Jewish defender of Palestinian rights against the apartheid Israeli government. He was asked about violence and its role in change, and he said he was against it except in the most dire circumstances. He said, "I made it, I lived, and I'm glad I lived." And I can relate to that. With all the pressures on us, living a normal lifespan is a very lucky, very fortunate thing. It's an accomplishment. He talked about the price of violence. He said generally, bad people are into violence. And maybe generally that's true. And good people who are drawn to violence change. So there is a consequence of violence. Not just unliving somebody, which should have enough significance in and of itself, but in your soul, consciousness, conscience, cellular structure, whatever you want to call it, because we know there are those who resort to violence when all else has failed, a last resort. But there are those for whom violence is a first resort, those who enjoy inflicting pain and suffering and death on others, like Trump. And for every Hitler who kills himself in a bunker, there are dozens of Stalins and Maos and Trumps who live long lives. We know the consequences are severe for those who try to make our imaginations a reality. But there is no shortcut. Earth First tried to bring attention to the destruction of the planet by blowing up a few SUVs, and they're all in jail for decades and may never get out. Remember, Nelson Mandela served 27 years in prison. Our jails today in the supposed land of the free, the land of free speech, are filled with nameless political prisoners who spoke out, threatened the status quo, and are forgotten. They were fighting these battles for you. Does Trump fight for you? Does Musk fight for you? You might not remember the Weather Underground, who were committed to the violent overthrow of the repressive Nixon government. They committed bombings and other acts of violence, and even wound up killing a few people, including many of their own members. Now, it wasn't like they could go door to door for donations, or solicit funds through the mail, or even get jobs. Why do you want this job, Bill? To pay for the revolution, sir. We'll call you. They resorted to crime to raise money. And I'm not saying that's right. But remember, the American government raises money through crimes and death as well, like the Iran-Contra scandal, or the CIA being the largest drug dealer in the world, or assassinating democratically elected leaders like Allende and Lumumba and replacing them with dictators who work for us, a supposed democracy, in order to rape the natural resources of this country now under the thumb of the USA. Or all our forever wars since World War II. It's crazy. If 1984 was written today, Big Brother wouldn't say war is peace. He'd say war is money. So it's really a question of language, of imagination. One is called a crime, and one is called governance. The radicals and revolutionaries are almost always caught, but the government criminals hardly ever. Let's turn that around. Let's stop calling people who are trying to build a fairer and more just world criminals. Then they wouldn't have to blow up shit. They don't really want to blow up shit. They've just run out of alternatives. Imagine, instead of bombs and guns, our imaginations were the weapons. Whereas, ironically, the government criminals absolutely want to commit these crimes, enjoy, relish, savor committing these heinous acts, and go to great lengths to not get caught by changing the laws to make it okay to commit these crimes. It's not a crime if there's no law against it, and it is a crime if they say so. That's what has to change. Shouldn't we be prosecuting and convicting the government criminals and corporate criminals who destroy countries and dreams and steal all the riches for themselves? Then you'd have Trump and Musk in prison forever. That would be a just society. Imagine that.